joining us from across. So if you just want to type it into the chat, let us know where you're from. That would be fantastic. Virginia, Miami, Orlando, London. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This is wonderful. I'm loving this. Rachel, are you seeing this?
I
Are you,
am.
friend? I absolutely love it. Let me grab, I know that I said we don't have slides, but we just have a couple just to get us started. But Paris, St. Louis, Calgary,
The
I,
numbers are going up. That means
they
that
are.
not everybody on here is my relative, which is both concerning and disturbing all at
I
the
know,
same time.
I know. We ask our friends to join, and then we see places we're like, what? Well, I guess I've got a friend there too. And I've got a
I,
friend there too. I
man,
love
I hope I live up to the hype here. Okay.
Oh, you will, you will. Let me go ahead. Like I said, I'm going to share. It's not about slideware, but we do have a couple of things just so we can make sure that we kick this off properly for you. And for those of you that have attended my chat with the Chiefs in the past, you know what it's like. I'm going to remove this because you all don't need the banner. I mean, you might want the banner, but I don't need the banner. But really, what you're going to experience for the next hour is a candid conversation between two friends, two professionals who are going to talk to you about being in the role of a chief of staff. Some of you are already chiefs of staff, some of you want to be chief of staffs, and some of you are just curious and you want to find out. No fluff. This is just, like I said, two folks that are going to have a great conversation about this role. So before we totally get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Anne Marie. I wrote a book a couple years ago about being a chief of staff. I'm writing my second. I've teased that I love trilogies, and I'm going to do a third book. And so if you're curious about the first book, I'll have my assistant drop the link in the chat right now. Feel free to pick it up. It's a great read, and I will keep you posted when the second book is coming. If you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn because that's where I make my announcements. I've had an opportunity to work for some amazing companies, so I've listed just a few here that helps color the perspective that I have as I'm working as a chief of staff. Um, Let me go to my next quick slide. A couple of notables about me. I'm the chief of staff architect, so I've got over 15 years of experience working in this space. I love learning, so I'm PMP certified, ITIL, a Scrum Master, you name it. I'm trying to figure out how to do it. And for people who are curious about learning about the Chief of Staff role, I've created a program called the Chief of Staff Academy, which is an accredited role, and it takes you through just what a Chief of Staff is, some of the commonalities in the role. Like it's definitely nuanced depending on your industry and leader, but there are some things that every Chief of Staff just needs to understand. And so this is a great opportunity for you to learn. And like I said, feel free to schedule some time, drop a chat, and I'll make sure that I get back to you. Now, this is the exciting part. Rachel, I am beyond thrilled. So if you don't use LinkedIn to network, reach out to me so I can give you some tips because you get those moments where you set up just a quick chat with somebody and you realize very quickly you don't have enough time. And that's what happened with Rachel and I. We were just going to chat
Oh, no.
for a few moments, and I think it was 45 minutes into we got to talk some more. We've got to have some more conversations. And she is fantastic. What's going to happen is I'm going to give her a chance to
Yeah.
introduce
Anne Marie, the
herself.
audio is cutting
And
out.
then I have got some questions that I want to talk
Ay, ay, ay.
on me. I'm close. All right. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Uh, Oh no, it's still cutting out, Anne Marie.
Rachel, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. And I'll let
Okay.
me, you know what? I'm going
I
to
only caught the
see if I
please
have a couple
introduce
more
yourself.
windows I can
I'll do
close.
that. Okay.
Yes.
Um, Hi
Okay, go for
everyone.
it.
So I'm Rachael Goldfarb. There are a lot of people on here. Luckily, I can't see any of your faces, so that's good. Um, most of you know me from LinkedIn. I've had a very interesting vantage point to the chief of staff role. I was really incredibly lucky at the very beginning of my career to to you know, managed to talk my way into the Clinton White House. And I was actually working as an assistant to the National Economic Council when somebody mentioned to me that John Podesta, the chief of staff to the president, was looking for an assistant. And I thought to myself, well, I can't apply for that because I'm going to CNN on Monday and it's Thursday. And I had like 5 interviews in a matter of 24 hours. Um, and I met with John on that Saturday, and he said to me, "What questions do you have for me?" And I said, "My only question is, when are you going to make this decision? Because I'm supposed to be at CNN on Monday." And he called me on Sunday and said, "Look, I want you to come and work for me." And so that began a journey of the chief of staff role for me. And I got to watch it up close with somebody who was exceptionally good at it. So I was very lucky. Um, I always like to remind people that I did very unimportant things for very important people. So it gave me an opportunity to see and understand and sort of observe it. And then I went to law school because everybody needs to do that in DC. And then, thought, okay, I've talked my way into the White House. What's the next most interesting place in the world to go work? And I managed to convince the Gates Foundation to hire me as the chief of staff to the president of global health. And so I was on the road 98% of the time, making sure that his commitments that he made on the road were, in fact, being met within the foundation. And then, I've done a lot of things since then. My big sort of chief of staff role in terms of scaling has been I was the 19th employee at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And literally, it was like me, Elizabeth Warren, and 18 other people in an elevator bank trying to figure out how we were going to open this government agency from scratch. Um, and so that was really interesting because I was the chief of staff to the technology team, and it wasn't your grandmother's technology team. We were really committed to revolutionizing technology in government. I think we were reasonably successful in that. We had a complaints line that the Department of Justice was extremely jealous of because we were sort of successful at like 98% of the calls resolved, whereas their numbers were slightly less, a lot less. And so, there were a lot of opportunities to scale, to think about culture, to think about all the things that, I've come to really care about. And fast forward, several years later, I've done a lot of work with nonprofits. I'm currently fractionally serving as a fractional chief of staff to a Norwegian company called Sparely, which is trying to disrupt the spare parts market. And I currently serve as a partner at Prime Executive Office, where Catherine Berardi, who used to be the chief of staff to Melody Hobson, she was the first one on sort of the map here in terms of building a chief of staff community and also building a search firm for a chief of staff. And I really believe in what she's doing. I think her approach is the smartest one out there. And so I'm serving as sort of a spokesperson for her and a thought leader in this space. So that brings me to here.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. So now I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to come on camera. We'll keep fingers crossed that my audio is not going to cut out, but if so, like I said, for me, the treat is having Rachel here to chat with us. And I'm just going to jump right into it. So it's interesting because typically when you apply for a job, you look at the job description and you feel like, yep, I'm going to do exactly what the job description is saying. But it's not always the case with the chief of staff role. And so, Rachel, when you stepped into this role, what did you misunderstand about the chief of staff role when you stepped in?
Yeah, so I'm looking down at some notes. I hope that that's okay. And also, I want to
Yep.
preface this by saying that my favorite authors tend to be the absolute worst speakers. So I hope to be better than that. But if you have any feedback or you want to let me know about anything, please let me know in the comments or in the chat or whatever.
Yep.
So getting back to the question, which is, what did I misunderstand about the role? And I think I thought I was going to be the person whispering in the king's ear, and it turns out I was the person making sure the kingdom had toilet paper. Like that was really sort of where I was. Um, I think that everyone thinks the chief of staff role is glamorous, and I've written about this on LinkedIn, which is, you have proximity to power, you have a wonderful sort of understanding of the organization, you sit at a very interesting perch. Um, and you're close to the CEO, right? But it's the most unglamorous job imaginable. You're the emotional and operational shock absorber for the entire organization. And, you know, it can sort of meld into a lot of different roles that aren't a chief of staff role. And I have a theory about it that it's really because somewhere along the way, uh, the role got diluted when corporate America borrowed the title from the White House and stripped out everything that makes it magical and also everything that makes it strategic. But I do think that it's really important to consider that it's also very much, it can be a tactical role. But what it
Sure.
isn't is a right hand role. I sort of hate that analogy because I think that that helps people conflate it with other sort of positioning within the executive suite, which is namely the executive admins, a personal assistant, all of those things. You are not a right hand person to a CEO. You're actually there to move the organization forward. And so one of the real advantages to working at the White House and seeing this roll up close was that I understood it from its very inception and how it works in the role that it was originated from. And so, you know, John Podesta, nobody confused him with the executive admin, Betty Curry. I mean, they don't look alike, but also they have absolutely nothing in common in terms of skill sets. So I think it's just important to remember that this is a role where you think it's sexy, you think it's glamorous, you think it's going to give you just such a fabulous view and it's not going to be that hard. And it is the most unglamorous. And it is truly one of the hardest roles in the entire C suite.
Yeah, yeah. You said something really interesting though, because you said it should not be confused as you're the right hand, because I have heard that many times. And in my mind, I have thought, well, I'm that person's right hand, even though I'm moving the organization along. Tell me why that is such an important nuance for people to understand.
I mean, I think it's an important nuance because, and here's sort of my three operating sort of foundational assumptions that I think are important in any way. I like to say I'm the left hand. I think that that's hilarious. Either way, you shouldn't be
I love
anybody's hand. That's sort of the point in that. Um, so, I think that there are three sort of foundational requirements of a chief of staff. The first is that you are there to protect the principal and to
that.
extend the principal's presence. That is very different than being the right hand person because the right hand person is outside of your office and is willing to find whatever you need whenever you need it at a moment's notice. And that turns into a very tactical role. And it just isn't. It's not. Um, Now, I do also meet a lot of chiefs of staff who say to me after 3 or 6 months, I'm only getting tactical stuff. I'm
Yeah.
not getting anything strategic. And my first question is, what does strategic actually mean to you? because it
Mhm.
might mean different things to different people. It is a very nebulous word, but also you're in a role that requires tremendous trust and confidence. And the
Right.
reality is, you're not going to establish that on day one or even day 90. I mean, let's be real here. I think the reason why I object to so many people sort of saying that the chief of staff is a 2 year stint is because that's actually when you sort of get a rhythm going. And the
Yes.
idea that, you're going to then abandon ship at that point. I mean, it takes at least a year to sort of establish the level of trust and the kind of sophistication that's required to take on things that are truly strategic. So, I think people sort of jump the gun on this and think that they're supposed to be handed something on day one when the realities are very different.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's why I think the right hand sort of analogy is a tricky one to do,
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And that makes sense. I really like it's interesting. Another point that you made where you say people think it's a 2 year stint, because that's what I was told when I was stepping in is this is going to help you get a view of the business and then you can go and do something else. And I have found in the 18 months to even know how to sound like them, to be able to represent our org and that individual. And so
Oh no, Anne Marie, you're going out
there's
again.
you barely think about the person you have to take for you. I'm gonna take my camera off then, and I'll come
Okay.
back, folks. But you all, again, this is
Oh
sorry,
no.
but I say about building cutting out. Am I back?
Yeah.
I'm seeing all
Yeah.
bars. Internet, come on, internet. Is it still cutting out a bit?
A little bit, but it's okay. I'll try and sort of piece together, or I can make up
Okay.
my own questions and then answer them, which would be a lot easier. But go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you think about a relationship that you have that you trust someone, how long did it take to build that relationship? It wasn't, in a month, it wasn't in a week. And sometimes it was after you had a challenge that you realize this person is in my corner. And your point about 2 years and what they think. So I'm seeing a comment from Stacy. Now that I'm a chief of staff, I've realized I love this role and I'm very much a career chief of staff. I get that. That has been the pivot that I've made. So I appreciate that comment. You have talked when we look at your pedigree, you've been a CEO. And how did being a CEO change the way that you approached being a chief of staff?
Yeah. And let me just make a comment about what Stacey said, which is, look, the chief of staff role in my mind is a pinnacle. It is not a pit stop. John Podesta didn't grow up and think, on my way to being chief of staff to the president of the United States, I'm going to go do something else. That's not how this works. Um, oh, I know, Andy, there were three foundational principles, and I've only shared the first one. That's by design. Um, so you have to stick around through the whole thing. Um, and so, in terms of like the sort of my CEO experience, which was pretty minimal in that, or it was pretty limited in that, I actually didn't, I ran my own company, but it was sort of it sputtered along for a while. But I think once the thing that I've realized the most is that once you've sat in this chair of the CEO, you sort of realize that the CEO isn't hoarding information or being difficult. I mean, sure, there's always going to be bad operators in all of this, but for the most part, CEOs are not trying to sort of hoard information. They're totally overwhelmed. They are completely drowning. And so it's important to understand that, yes, the chief of staff isn't managing a calendar, so not like sort of the tactical blocks of information and time,
Hmm.
you're managing someone's cognitive and emotional bandwidth. And that, to some extent, is a lot trickier and more important. And it means you really have to be able to push back. And so,
Yeah.
the one thing that I advise people to do, and I will give credit to Maria Rowcliffe to helping me think through this a little bit, who's a wonderful chief of staff. But, I asked some questions, but she asked an even better one. So now I have three questions that I think everyone should ask their boss on day one of becoming a
Mhm.
chief of staff, which is, how do you want me to disagree with you? That's Maria's.
Yeah.
And then my questions were, how do I persuade you to reconsider? Um, and what never works with you? Like, what's the way in which, you know, I always say your partner or someone out there who approaches something that you care about so deeply and they just can't get you to budge.
Hmm.
And when should I know that? And how should I know that? And sometimes we just come up with a secret word, like cupcakes. I mean, something that sort of indicates that I'm never getting this person to move on this. Um,
Right.
so just to go through the three questions again, because Stacy asked, how do you want me to disagree with you? How do I persuade you to reconsider? And what never works with you? Because if you can't push back, you're not a partner, you're a passenger on a steam train. Like you're not even in
Right.
the,
Yeah.
high rail efficiency lines. So it's really
Mhm.
important that you're able to push back and sort of make a difference in terms of influencing, because you're the fly in the room. You're the one that looks, you're the omniscient narrator, as I always say. You're the one who
Wow.
sees everything in a way that nobody else does. And the goal and your job is to make sure that you bring certain realities to the CEO, because most people are just nodding in meetings, right? And the role of the chief of staff is to pull the CEO aside and say, actually, that was a terrible idea. And it wouldn't,
Hmm.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention that this is actually going to be very problematic for you. And it's your
Hmm.
prerogative whether you want to pursue it or not. I mean, I just said this to the CEO that I work with right now. I said, it's your prerogative, it's your company. You can do this, and I will support you. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't point out here are the risks and problems with sort of this particular choice or decision. So I think that's important. And I look, yeah, so that's how I feel about sort of the CEO chief of staff dynamic. I think it's a very delicate balance, but it's one that you have to push back on. Otherwise, you're not useful to the CEO as a chief of staff.
And I was going to say they expect that, and they should be expecting that. They should expect that when you're in the room, you're going to be challenged by the leads that I work for. And initially, I would tell them, I have some feedback about the way that you're going. And at the end of the day, if this is the direction you want to take, that's great. But here's some data that I've compiled with the steps that you're going to take. And I've got some concerns. And they want that. They want the challenge because they want to do what's right for the business. And
Yeah.
that's how we're getting some amazing
Sorry, you're breaking up again.
questions. And so I wanted to ask you, do you want to let me want to go down the list that we've got because we've got some really good questions that are coming through on the chat.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to do that, but let's all remember that
Yeah.
I didn't prep for these. So I may say something wildly inappropriate, but go ahead. Let's do it.
So we've got one. Let me grab this first one. I thought it was interesting. What are your thoughts on chief of staff job descriptions that require an MBA or Big Six consulting or prior experience as a chief of staff? You've got an
How
opinion,
much time do you have?
right?
Um,
Um,
you know, here's my problem with it, which is, and I think that I get to say this maybe. because I went to the University of Pennsylvania for college. Although I think it's really important to remember that when I applied there, you needed a body temperature of 98.6, three active brain cells, and no grammatical mistakes in your essay. Whereas now you have to be like the king of a small country and demonstrate that you've changed that country in some transformative way. I mean, it's not the same. I did not get the same degree that people are getting right now. I never would have gotten it. Nevertheless, Trump got in. So, I mean, there's always hope for people. But I think that, the biggest thing is that this is a role that people seem to think pedigree is important. And the reality is, it actually is not. There is nothing about going to an Ivy League school that prepares you specifically for being a chief of staff in a way that other people don't. I mean, it's crazy, right? Because to some extent, I think, I mean, you could even argue against it. I'm not going to do that here, but I do think that an MBA prepares you, I suppose, for sort of understanding the business potentially. Um, but I just think it eliminates a ton of people who are actually very skilled at being a chief of staff because they've been a chief of staff, right? In some capacity, whether they call themselves that or not. And my thing is that you can't, sure, do they understand a spreadsheet in a way that I probably don't because I went to law school because I was terrified of spreadsheets and numbers? Yes. But I think that, that's not the entire job description. And whenever I see a job description that says MBA and the big four or the big six or whatever you want to call them, first of all, let's deal with the consulting part first. I mean, we just dealt with the MBA part, but let's deal with the consulting part, which is these consultants are sort of dropped into a situation, required to assess it, and sometimes they do an exceptionally good job. This isn't a knock on consultants,
Right.
but then they sort of helicopter out. And
Yes.
the reality is, when you're a chief of staff, you're sort of you're there in the thick of it and you don't get to helicopter out. In fact, you're the last man standing often. And you're the one that's sort of making sure that everybody else gets to where they need to go safely. And so I just think it's really important that we all acknowledge that consultants, while yes, they're very good at sort of analyzing a business and potentially seeing gaps, they're not people readers and they are not the people that you necessarily want in the room. More like being responsible for the emergency exit on an airplane. I mean, I think sometimes chiefs of staff don't even get on the airplane. Like they're so worried about everybody else getting on the airplane, they miss the plane. But all of which is to say, I just think I think it's baloney. I mean, I have a 3.5-year-old, so I have to say things like that. But I just can't fathom a world in which an MBA and a big four consulting gig really makes you fundamentally prepared to understand power, people, and politics in a room. Maybe it does, but it certainly is not the thing that you should require. So I think it's important to sort of keep that in mind, that these job descriptions, whenever they say that, the indication to me is they don't understand what the chief of staff is. That's really what it signals to me.
Right. And I don't freeze, but I want to take this down a little bit of a different slant because we're talking about these consultants, but I want to actually talk about fractional versus a full-time chief of staff because I think that's an important distinction. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So I've become, and I actually commented on somebody else's post about this, I think, which was I've become sort of slightly obsessed with the differences between a full-time chief of staff and a fractional one, because I actually think both of them bring enormous benefits to the table. And also there are real disadvantages to it, right? Like it's not a perfect thing. And so when I think about myself as a fractional chief of staff, I belong to no one, right?
Mhm.
And that's not a bug, it's a feature. And so, full time chiefs of staff, for better or for worse, accumulate political baggage, whether they want to or not. And the goal always, if you're a really good chief of staff and if your organization understands how to utilize one, um, it's really important to think about how, uh, the chief of staff, um, I think it's, sorry, I just sort of lost my train of thought because I was catching the chat room. I apologize. Anyway, so I think it's important that, yeah, a really good chief of staff does not have a P&L, right? They don't
Right.
own anything. They're sort of Switzerland. And because of that, they they you'd think that they wouldn't get into politics, but of course they do, because that is the nature of the role. Um, and you get pulled into the drama that has nothing to do with strategy, and you're doing a lot of sort of triaging. Um,
Yes.
and so I think that with the fractional chief of staff, work lets you see the cracks without being trapped in the foundation of it.
Hmm.
On the other hand, you're not embedded in it. And so there's a level of trust that you've got to sort of obtain almost at like Olympian speed. And it's really hard to do that. so, um, so that's sort of what I think is the distinction. I think, look, the downside is real to fractional work too, which is, first of all, it's feast or famine. I mean, that's just the name of the game with any consulting work. Um, but you don't belong to anyone, including anyone in the organization. And so your support system has to come from outside the organization.
Right.
Um, and I have this like really interesting theory that I've thought about, like sort of been percolating in my head for the last 2 weeks, which is the way to practice building trust really quickly is actually networking on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
because you don't know these people at all. You know what you see, what they allow you to see on their profile, and that's it. And
Right.
I think that what I've loved about LinkedIn, in addition to it just being really a fascinating platform where you get to sort of engage with people who are interested in the same things as you. And, I think it's sort of one of the more sophisticated platforms that's really been, and it's been very good to me. I think it's been a great, and I don't work for LinkedIn, and they have not paid me to say that. But I think that, just even reaching out to you, for example, Anne Marie, I reached out to
Yeah.
you and I thought, I don't know anything about this woman except she wears fabulous glasses. And somehow I'm going to figure out a way. Oh, and look, she seems to have a little kid. So surely we can connect on that level. And we
Right.
did, right? I mean, you and I like had a very lengthy conversation about our
We
children
did.
and how you have a baby at home, and what you've gone through, what I've gone through. It's been a real challenge. Not that I'm going to divulge too much, but I think it's really important that you figure out how to home in on people's personal experiences, or at
Hmm.
least demonstrate a level of enthusiasm and a curiosity about them. And so actually networking on LinkedIn has made me a better fractional chief of staff. How's that for a theory?
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing also is as you're networking, we always hear the word be authentic, be authentic.
Yeah.
And there's an aspect of authenticity that comes out naturally when you're able to connect with someone. And so if I go back to the conversation that you and I had that first time, it was, hey, how you doing? And we surfacely connected, and then we went deep really fast.
Yeah.
And then become this friendship where I feel very safe to be able to chat with you about things about my personal life, and you reciprocated. And that's also part of the chief of staff role. I tell a lot of people when you're working with that principal, you may have to be vulnerable first. You may have to show them your authenticity first because they're trying to suss you out. Because they've got all of this stuff that they need to entrust in you, and they don't know the moment they tell you is it going to spread across the organization and they're going to find out 2, 3 levels deep, or can they truly
Right.
you? Because they really have to sit down and whiteboard these ideas. We're living during a time where it's really difficult because there's so many layoffs. And how many conversations I've been, and I know the same thing with you, where we're talking about layoffs for people who are even in the leadership team. So they don't
Yep.
even know. And you're trying to figure this stuff out. And so I love that you said network, 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 practice those skills, practice being authentic, and listen to your gut because your gut's going to,
Oh yeah.
danger, Will Robinson, step back. This, don't
That's right.
go here.
That's
And
right.
if you have an opportunity to step into a situation where it's a beautiful thing, then step into it fully with everything. And if you don't, your gut's going to help you. And so I
Yeah.
appreciate those differences that you brought up, and I appreciate um, networking. I can't tell you how many people I talk to. I'm like, "Are you networking?" No, and I'm like, "Okay, well, you know what?"
Look, let's be clear about what networking is and what it isn't, because I
Yeah,
happen to think we're in Women's History Month, and which should be all 12 months, but bygones. Um,
yeah,
but really, when we're talking about women in particular, they're terrible at this. And I learned very early on in my life how to do this well, and I feel incredibly lucky. And I think that the one thing you sort of have to remember and keep in mind is that it is not a transactional call. You are
right,
not trying to get something out of anybody. You are trying to figure out who people are and how you connect with them in a meaningful way. Authenticity is sort of this weird thing. And I think, people who are, I believe in it and I think it's hugely important. But I also recognize that there are people who are introverts and there are people who are different and they don't want to necessarily share every single thing about themselves. I mean, I'm an
right,
open book, but, other people aren't. And I think that, the most important thing to remember is that you're trying to understand why this person is interesting. and
right.
everyone has a story to tell. And actually, Meredith Mark, because I know you, I can answer this question, which is how did I learn to network? From my mother. So, you know, the way in which you do it is you really just want to be curious about people. You want to understand them better. And that is a fundamental part of being a chief of staff, which is understanding what motivates people, what gets them excited, what completely enervates them, what are things that sort of make it impossible for them to move forward. And, you'd be amazed at the little things that you can ask or do. And I wrote this on a LinkedIn piece once, and I really thought it was a killer hook. And it clearly wasn't because nobody saw it. But I mean, somebody confessed a negligent homicide to me in a one-on-one. I mean, it was like this typical one-on-one. And suddenly she was crying and telling me all about this, a crime that she committed before. So as the lawyers in the group, rest assured, I didn't have to report anything. Like, still, I consider that a real, like, significant moment in my career, not because she felt comfortable enough to do that with me. And I think that that's the way in which you have to approach people. You are
Hmm.
not asking for anything in the first, and you're not even asking anything in the third conversation. You are just trying to figure out who you are and why it's interesting. That's it.
Right, right. I'm gonna change for just a moment. I want to go to one of these questions that we've got from Jessica, and it says, "I'd love to know a bit more about how you set boundaries on your own time while protecting your principles as a fractional chief of staff." I've got some
Yeah.
ideas, but I'd love to hear you first.
So the first place I operate from, which granted is not fair, but John Podesta made an effort to be with his family every night at dinner. Did it happen every night? No, but he really tried. And I feel like if the chief of staff to the president of the United States can be home for dinner, so can your principal. That's number
Yep.
one. Number two is, look, I think, you have to set up boundaries in terms of things that take up an amount of time that's important to you. Before I had a toddler, um, I can't say that most people would say, oh, I go to the gym. And my response is, I never went to the gym. My gym was, sliding the credit card in and sliding it out. Like that was my upper body.
Yep.
Um, Now my upper body strength comes from the fact that I have to extricate my 3-year-old from almost every situation very quickly because he has the sharing instincts of Vladimir Putin. But all of which is to say, you have to have certain boundaries and do things that you care about that can't be touched.
Right.
And the reason why this is so important is because you are absorbing everything that the organization is struggling with. And I can't emphasize enough how hard this job is. It
Mm.
really is. I mean, I was talking to a woman a couple of weeks ago, and I really thought she had PTSD from her experience as a chief of staff. And it didn't surprise me. I mean, some of these founders in particular, but CEOs too, they just have no understanding
Mm.
of how to sort of approach the world. They were fabulous individual contributors that got sort of promoted into management positions. And suddenly they're managing, except they have no idea how to manage people. They know how to
Right.
manage like their own ideas in their head, and that's about it. And so this is a really hard job because you're constantly pushing back and you're constantly challenging everyone around you. And
Hmm.
so, whether that's exercising or whether that's building a community, I mean, one of the things that I've loved about LinkedIn too is that I've made some really genuine friendships. I've really made people who, if I have a problem in my professional life, I'm going to call them and say, what do I do about this? Right. And so, look, there are a lot of communities out there. There are chief of staff communities out the wazoo. And I applaud everyone who's leading one because I think that it's really hard to do. And I think it's also very important.
Yeah.
I do think that there's an argument to be made that this probably needs to be sort of condensed a little bit and that there are
Yes.
too many out there. But nevertheless, I appreciate that there are people out there who recognize that this job is so difficult that it requires a kind of community. Um, and I think you've got to sort of look inside yourself and figure out, okay, what's important to me right now? It's my 3-year-old. And
Right.
so, when it's dinner time and bedtime routine, you just can't get a hold of me. I will be
Mhm.
available after that and I will be available before that. But that kid rules my life from 6 to 9. That's it.
I love that. I love that. And you said something at the beginning when you were talking about your 3 questions that sets you up to build those boundaries. When you're talking to your principal and you want to know, how do I disagree with you? How do I set these boundaries? So then you can respect that because I am the same way that I became a mom for the first time last year in August when I adopted this beautiful little girl. And if you were to talk to some of my friends, they tell you she can't find her rhythm. And I am a very structured person. I have organization down to a pat, and I have been struggling to find my routine because I have a new boss. Her name is Milagro. And if she screams, it
That's
doesn't
right.
matter what's going on, I have to attend to my new boss. And so when you set those boundaries, and sometimes it can be very tactical, you might literally put on your calendar, like you said, 6 to 9 p.m. is blocked out and you see it. But I think the thing that is so important about that is that you respect your own boundaries because you are telling people how to treat you. If you have your focus times, your boundaries set, and you say, oh, but you can reach me if you need me, you've just told them my boundary is really not important. I-
Yeah.
I'm
And
willing to break that boundary.
and let me say this because I didn't have my son until I was 45, which I don't recommend generally, but just saying, I had a very full and interesting life before my kid. And for those of you who don't have children, you are also entitled to take time out of your day and
Yeah.
say, you know, like, this is my time. This is me. I need a relief. I need something to
Mhm.
do that doesn't involve absorbing the struggles and challenges of this organization and all the people in it. And so, I often think that like we shouldn't really be talking about childcare as the major problem for working mothers. It's actually, and I know this is like far off into the not having anything to do with the chief of staff, but I do think that there is a chief of staff hook, which is um, it's a caregiving crisis. We all have parents and they're getting older and they cannot afford the kinds of luxuries that our grandparents could afford. And the reality is, you're going to have to take care of a parent. And given the profoundly broken healthcare system that we're in, even though some of you are from London, I mean, everybody's got problems with their healthcare. And I think
Mhm.
it's really important to remember that you have to have these boundaries, because when you need to carve out time for your parents or whoever it is in your life that requires care, whether that's a 3-year-old or a 30-year-old, you're going to have those boundaries in place. And let me just say, sort of as a thing, which is, since we're in Women's History Month, like, I think that, look, most chiefs of staff are women. I understand that there are a lot of men out there who are, and they're very good at it. But most chiefs of staff are women. And I really do believe that the only way to diversify the C suite really effectively is to start at the chief of staff role. And if you're going to do that, you better make sure that this role is leveraged and understood, crystal
Mhm.
clarity, because once they do well in these roles, once we all do well in these roles, we're able to influence not just strategy, but also, we're able to really understand and build workplaces that are workable for people, because right now they're not, right? This return to office, all of these rigid sort of structures that were in place prior to the pandemic, it's just unrealistic to expect that of people now. Um, I think that there's something to be said for being in the office versus not being. We're not here to debate that, but I do think that chiefs of staff have the opportunity to really move the needle in terms of making workplaces work. And the classic example is, putting aside that Sheryl Sandberg, whatever she's done for teenagers in America, when her
Mhm.
husband tragically died, Facebook had a bereavement policy of 2 days. Once her husband died, that policy changed in an instant into 20 days with survivor benefits. And I think that every chief of staff has the opportunity to sort of impact an
Yes,
organization if they're leveraged correctly. If a founder or CEO or executive doesn't understand what this role is supposed to do, you're screwed before you even walk in the door. So
absolutely.
that's why I think that the role definition is incredibly important. Um, to the point where I will just say, um, I'm working with a colleague, Susie Cool. Her last name actually is Cool, Coul. Um, and she and I are going to start a newsletter together next week. We're going to launch it, and it's called the Cool and Gold Briefing.
Love that.
And
I love it.
and so I'm really excited about it because Susie has sort of like very clear framework. She has a very she's from the UK, and she's spent many, many years at the House of Commons and done a lot of the same sort of political type of work that I've done, although she was with the Conservative Party and I am definitely not that. But all of which is to say, we both sort of agree that the clarity and the sort of understanding of this role is critically important. It's the only
Mhm.
way it succeeds. And if you don't have a chief of staff in your C-suite, with AI being as ubiquitous as it is, and all of these other things, you're going to need a chief of staff. I don't care if you have 3 people or 300,000 people. You
Yes,
need a chief of staff in every organization.
I love that. So I'm going to pause because it looks like we've got about 10 minutes. This has been fantastic, and we're going to keep going down these questions, but I wanted to pause for just a brief moment. Uh, I know you guys have enjoyed listening to Rachel. And we could go for probably another couple more hours with this group and the questions that they're raising because they're such critical questions. We have put her LinkedIn in the chat. My LinkedIn is in the chat. These webinars happen every month, once a month, the first Friday of the month. So if you did not sign up for the series, sign up for the series because this is what you're going to get. Real world insights. Even though she's got a piece of paper, she's talking from experience. These are the battle wounds that you've got that and it's not just series. So make
Yeah.
sure you sign up for these series. And next month, my guest is somebody that I've had before, Chris Artefio, talking about emotional regulation for a chief of staff. You don't want to miss that. And then if you are more curious, book some time with me and let's talk about this role. One of the things that I really appreciate that you're helping demystify, Rachel, is that uh, there's so many perspectives, but if you don't understand the value of the chief of staff to the principal and what you bring to the table, you're wasting time. And this can really, these catchphrases move the needle, but it really does move the needle. It really, truly does. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to jump into some more questions that we have because, girl, you've got all these people thinking, thinking,
I
thinking.
know. And what I want to say is, look, I'm happy to answer questions over LinkedIn. You can DM me at any time. And I also do have 15-minute office hour slots that I offer for free.
Awesome.
But I also do some advisory work. Like there are plenty of ways in which you can get a hold of me.
Mhm.
And I'm always happy to share my opinions with people, mostly
Yeah.
because I think I'm right. So,
Well, I'm gonna bounce to one of our final questions, and this is one that you and I have talked about a little bit, and it says, "How do you see the chief of staff role evolving over the next 5 years?"
yeah, so that's a really good question. I'm going to grab my notes again because I thought about this a lot. Somebody asked about like how is AI going to impact this role, and the answer is AI is coming for everything, and I'm completely
Yeah.
convinced that the chief of staff is not going to be sort of you know immune to this. But I think you know the scheduling, the data crunching, the deck building, AI is going to eat all of that alive, and it should, because it took up so much time and it was never a valuable part of the job anyway. The valuable part is understanding people. It's the simmering tensions, it's the dynamics that keep work from moving, it's the ability to walk into a meeting and know who's going to blow up and why and what they're going to blow up about before they blow up about it. And,
Yes.
right now I've said to you, like this, the chief of staff community is too dispersed right now. I do believe that there are too many groups, there's too much confusion. And the best community is the one you build yourself. So, spend time. Look, and for those of you who are in communities or promoting communities, I love you for it. Keep going. I think that they're really important, but I also think we need to sort of evaluate ourselves as a community and
Yeah.
figure out, read what people write, subscribe to my newsletter, you know, and understand that, figure out what makes you memorable, right? Don't DM someone asking to work together before you've taken them up on anything they've already offered, right? So, like, build your own community, really make an effort to sort of bridge and create relationships, because I do think in 5 years' time, I'm not convinced that AI is really going to have, it might be, it might be so sophisticated that it understands, human judgment, body
Yeah.
language, all of the little subtle things that really help to guide a chief of staff in his or her work. And I just don't see that changing in the immediate sense. I do think, though, that there's a lot of the work that the chief of staff does that AI is coming after. And so if you're
Yeah.
not up on AI, if you're not using it as a tool and not just like, don't use it as Google, you really need to use it as a tool that helps shape your work and how frequently you do it and how much time you spend on tasks that are repeatable. So all of these things, I mean, I've built some really interesting AI agents that have done some wondrous things for me. Like I now know what every subscription I have under the sun and whether I'm getting the best deal. I mean, that's like, right. So, I think that the chief of staff role will always be important. And I think it's actually having a renaissance moment because it's becoming more important and more critical. I
Right.
actually think that the reason why so many people want to be a chief of staff is because so many companies want chiefs of staff. But
Hmm.
you've got to understand what the role is. And so here are the three things that a chief of staff does for everybody who's stuck on here.
All right.
One
Wait.
is,
If you don't
yep,
got your notepads, She's going to be dropping some knowledge. So grab a notepad, grab something because we've got 4 minutes left. Go ahead, Rachel.
So the first one is you protect the principal and you extend the principal's presence. That means that you are playing chess a lot. And
Yes.
my classic example is when I was the chief of staff at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I had 6 bosses in 4 years. 5 of them were fired. And let me tell you, I knew that they were getting fired 3 months before they did. And the goal was to sort of push them in a way where they wouldn't get fired, and they didn't listen to me. So, I mean, it's like the chief of staff is the ultimate I told you so, but you can't ever say that. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the first thing. The second thing is you are orchestrating the C suite. You are the person that is making sure that every single member of the leadership team is working towards whatever it is that the organization needs to move forward. And so that's sort of a reflection of, much like the president of the United States, who's out there doing politics and external affairs and all of these things, somebody's got to mind the shop and make sure that the Department of Defense and the Department of State aren't saying the exact opposite things. So, and, you know, Benjamin Franklin famously said, if you want to keep a secret between 3 people, 2 of them need to be dead. And the thing that's important here is that 3 people create miscommunication. And so, again, if you're a founder with 3 people or 30,000 people, you're always going to have these sort of challenges. And then the last piece is
Yes.
you are a broad advocate for the staff. You're the one who has the authority to go into the CEO's office and say, Houston, we have a problem. Your policy around X stinks and it's about to create a mutiny. And I think that's really important because nobody really has that authority except for the chief of staff. And nobody's going to be honest enough with the CEO except for the chief of staff to sort of resolve those kinds of conflicts. So those are the 3 things. I just wanted to make sure that I got them in before the end of the meeting.
I thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I, I, I knew it was going to be fire. I knew it was going to be fire.
You're breaking up
This is
again, but I just want to say this
I
was so much
know having a
fun.
great on this call.
And also, like,
Oh,
I think you're
yes.
amazing. I
Yeah.
think everybody should have Anne Marie in their corner. And so, to the extent that you know, can really keep tabs on her, you should, because she's a rock star. She's a force, and I really
Oh,
admire you. And I think this is just a fabulous opportunity for people. I'm looking forward to the other ones in the next couple of months.
yeah. Yes. So uh, I just wanted to say thank you again, Rachel. If you want to set up time with either one of us, it sounds like Rachel has an opportunity for you to get on her calendar also, get on my calendar. And I typically have a training where I talk about AI and the chief of staff. And so be on the look for that. But 1 minute, we've got 1 minute left. Rachel, I'm going to let you have that last minute before I sign all of us out.
You know, look, I'm just thrilled that so many people were here who aren't related to me. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time to join me in this. It was a lot of fun. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to sort of talk a little bit about my newsletter. I hope that you'll subscribe and, you know, see you on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And
Take
have a
care.
great start to your weekend. Bye.
You too. Bye.